Donald Trump is attending a critical hearing in his case involving classified documents found at Mar-a-Lago.
It adjourned just a few minutes ago with no resolution on a trial date.
Just over 500 miles away in Atlanta, the judge overseeing the Georgia election interference case against Trump and his co-defendants will hear closing arguments this afternoon.
If he decides to disqualify the district attorney, and her whole office risks losing this case against Donald Trump.
And hanging over all of this is Supreme Court, which agreed to take up Donald Trump's claims of immunity this April.
Donald Trump's whole strategy is delay, delay, delay.
I think all of the cases should be dealt with before November, because after that, should he become president, I don't think any of it's going to get heard.
The two front runners traveling to the southern border, making dueling appearances.
Instead of playing politics with the issue, why don't we just get together and get it done?
This is a Biden invasion over the past 3 years.
One man who now actually wants to work with Republicans to get something done on the border. One man who wants to keep an issue alive.
Good evening once again. I'm Stephanie Ruhle. It is just 249 days until the election, and there is one word to sum up this last week: delay. Delay of the criminal court case against Donald Trump, delay as Congress kicks the can again to fund the government, and delay on taking real action to fix our southern border. So let's get smarter and bring in our nightcap. NBC legal analyst and criminal defense attorney Danny Savalas is here. Dan Nathan with CNBC's Fast Money, Basil Smikle, Democratic strategist and former executive director of the New York State Democratic Party, and comedian John Fugelsang. All right, gentlemen, let's start with the many, many, many cases against Donald Trump. John, I turn to you first. The Supreme Court is now going to take up this immunity case for Trump,
yes,
which no matter how they decide, he's getting more delays,
yes,
right? Delay, delay, delay. Has he already won, given where we are in terms? No. Okay.
Won what?
Well, his best defense has been slow play this, and that's exactly what's happening.
These delays will all be forgotten. There's no way he wins this race with karma. Look, this Supreme Court, I got to say, I'm convinced they're the best court money could buy. Seriously, bribe back better. Bribe back better. He's getting everything he wants from them. And you look at this court now delaying this, trying as hard as they can. And I have no problem with this case. This election interference case is the biggest case in the history of this country. I mean, 220-odd years of peaceful transfer of power until this. It's huge. If it starts right before the election, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with voting during a commercial break. But people have got to look at this and realize how rigged this is. And these 6 justices, you got 2 of them appointed by George W. Bush, who the majority of Americans voted against when he got the White House. 3 of them appointed by Donald Trump, who the majority of Americans voted against twice. And the 6th, Clarence Thomas, by George H.W. Bush, who opposed the '64 Civil Rights Act. Americans don't choose the justices who choose our laws for us. And this highlights that.
Damn. Danny, can we talk about what the Supreme Court is looking at, right? They could make a decision that says a U.S. citizen can operate above the law with no consequence. If they do side with Donald Trump, where does that leave us?
It would be monumental. I mean, on the one hand, the mere fact that they are taking this case up speaks volumes, because they very easily could have, and many people predicted they might just say, look, the district court issued an opinion. It was well-reasoned. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals issued a well-reasoned opinion. There's not a whole lot of debate here. Everybody seems to be in agreement. They could have denied the request to even hear the case in the first place. But you're absolutely right in that the real goal here, and it's strange because none of the lawyers will put it in the papers and the judges don't really talk about it, but the unspoken mission here is delay and avoidance of delay. And I'll say this, Steph, in 2023, I was saying some of these trials will not start until 2025. And, John, everybody laughed at me, and now here we are. Here we are, all these former federal prosecutors who are much smarter than me. They were on here saying, no way. And they're right, in a sense. In federal court moves very quickly. So in an ordinary case, you can expect it to go to trial very quickly. Bush v. Gore is a great example of the Supreme Court moving quickly when it wants to, John. You're exactly right. But with these cases, knowing that there would be such monumental legal issues, presidential immunity is just one of many, that this case would take a long time. All 4 criminal cases would take a long time. And I couldn't point to any specific thing except to say that things happen. Or in Latin, thingus happenus. It's a legal principle. But things would happen, and here we are. Things have happened. Delay is happening. We shouldn't be that surprised. And I still stand by what I said in 2023. Some of these trials aren't going forward until 2025. Save the tape, but don't save the tape. Just remember I said it tonight, and that's it.
Dan, a lot of Democrats are furious. They're now panicked about it. But do you really think there's voters out there that are actually saying, I think he's guilty. I think he's corrupt. I think maybe he was involved in election interference. However, I need a court decision to help me to decide how I'm going to vote. I am not familiar with any of those voters. How about you?
No, I'm not either. And I think that Donald Trump has kind of embraced this, right? If you think about just his tactics over the last, call it, year since these cases have been kind of bubbling up. I mean, he's happy to sit in a courtroom. He's happy to walk outside the courtroom and kind of tell the narrative that he wants.
All our cameras are there. We don't go to his rallies. We go to court.
Right. So I mean, listen, aside from this, Eugene Carroll, that money, I think that really freaked him out, right? So he's got to put a bond up or whatever, however they're going to, that freaked him out. That kind of hits at the core of who he is. And we'll see how that plays out over time. But these other ones, I mean, obviously the one in D.C., that's the one that sends him to jail. The other stuff is kind of like, what's going on in Florida is a bit of a sideshow. What's going on here in New York is a bit of a sideshow. And I think a lot of folks said, let's focus on the really important one, to John's point, the one that really is actually 200 years of history in the making and might be the next 100 years of how we kind of operate in our democracy. So, again, I'm probably with you, sadly, 2025.
But hold on. Don't they want us to believe the hush money case is a sideshow? It sounds like it, right? Oh, you're paying off a porn star. But the reason Stormy Daniels was paid off to withhold information, not from Donald Trump's wife, but from the American voter.
Someone's already gone to prison for it. It is not a sideshow. Donald Trump is an unindicted co-conspirator, and a lot of guys outraged now had no outrage when Michael Cohen did the time for the exact same crime.
And I think the important point here is that we have to make sure he's being held accountable for everything that he's done. I agree that the majority of voters are probably not weeding through all of the legalese that is now going to be extended for another several weeks and months. They'll be more motivated by the IVF decision in Alabama than they will be likely with this. However, holding him accountable so that future presidents can't do exactly what he's doing is incredibly important. I'd also add this point. It strikes me as ironic and problematic that the folks who were out there on January 6th, many of them have been indicted and sent to prison, yet Donald Trump is still out. The ringleaders have not been tried and convicted, but all of the so-called foot soldiers have been. I have no sympathy for them, but it really does go to show you the difference in how he acts and the privilege that he has versus all the folks that he sends out to do his dirty work. That is made especially true when he goes in front of a crowd and talks about how African Americans should completely understand the position that he's in because he's being persecuted in the ways we're persecuted. If nothing else shows you how different that circumstance is, it's today because of everything you said about who's appointed those Supreme Court justices, he knows exactly what he's doing. He knows exactly how to play the system, and he's doing it in front of our face. So
and he didn't say that to the black voters. No, he said it past the black voters to his white face.
The blacks, right, the objectification of us. So if there is no other example of just how rigged the system how rigged the system is, and how much he is rigging it, it is what we're seeing unfold right now.
Do you think he will be held accountable in Georgia? I don't remember the last time we were talking about election interference on his part or the 20-odd other co-defendants for weeks now. It is all about when Fani Willis and a fellow prosecutor potentially started dating. I mean, the final day of the hearing was today. We haven't talked about Trump in weeks.
A month ago, if you'd asked me what the Georgia case meant to Trump, I would have said it was a real threat. I've always said the federal cases are a far bigger threat, mostly because 90+% of federal cases end in a guilty plea or a verdict. But Georgia was certainly up there in terms of threats. Now I'm not so sure. I think the law on the whole is on the side of the Georgia prosecutors. I think they end up avoiding being disqualified, but that doesn't mean that the case hasn't been fatally injured.
How?
Now, there are many. I'll give you several reasons. Number one.
How does it affect the RICO charges?
How does it affect the RICO? Let me say this. It doesn't affect the substantive charges one iota. If you're talking about does it affect whether or not the defendants are guilty or not guilty, It doesn't. It never has. But practically speaking, this motion could be the end of the Georgia prosecution. Let me game it out for you. For example, Fani Willis and Nathan Wade are disqualified. Really, Fani Willis. She's the architect of this case. Who is going to take it up then? They will have to find a prosecutor who is interested in taking this on.
And the judge chooses it.
And is it going to be the Republican Attorney General in Georgia? I think not. So now you have a political reason why this case dies a slow death. Or, for example, maybe it just hangs in limbo while they find someone to take on the case.
You're telling me the Kraken lady may have flipped for nothing? Is that what you're saying?
Right, exactly right. Some of those defendants are wondering, why did we flip so early? Some of the defendants have already pleaded guilty in the Georgia case. Let me tell you, the law is definitely on the prosecutor's side. The facts are on the defense's side because the facts are salacious. But here's the theory, and it either flies or it doesn't. The theory is that the prosecutors were corrupt because she, Fani Willis, had a relationship that predated the appointment of Nathan Wade. She appointed Nathan Wade because he was her boyfriend, and therefore the money that went to Nathan Wade, which came back to her in the form of vacations, constitutes not necessarily an actual conflict, but the appearance of impropriety. And that was a major argument today, the legal standard to be applied. They don't even know because this has never come up in this context. So they don't know what legal standard will actually apply. It's all up to Judge McAfee. And ultimately, you're right. Does it affect the substantive guilt or not guilt of the defendants? No. But is it a real problem for this prosecution? Yes.
It was a showdown in Texas this week with President Biden and Donald Trump holding dual events along the border. Dan, you are a New Yorker, but you're from upstate New York.
Yes.
Let's talk about this issue because the way Donald Trump and President Biden approach it are totally different. President Biden wasn't talking about it much the last 3 years. Now he is focused. He is putting forth legislation. Republicans are blocking him. Donald Trump is all gut and anger. But for voters, things like immigration is an emotional issue. And Trump, until now, has been doing very well with that messaging. How do you think voters take this? And is it too late for Joe Biden to change the narrative?
Well, it really is a question of politics versus policy. And I think, Joe Biden joined the politics game and, maybe a little too late. It's something that he has not been polling well at all, right? So Trump has really had this strongman sort of role. It's kind of the whole thing that he's done going back to 2015, really trying to scare Americans about immigration. I think the Democrats have focused on the policy. They had this bipartisan plan. Now, yeah, it's about security, but it's also about fixing the immigration system. I don't think any MAGA politician is really focused on trying to fix the immigration system that we need. If you look around the world and you look at the demographic problems that China, that Germany, that Japan are facing, and we're doing a little bit better, but not that much better, right? So a fix for the immigration system makes a lot of sense. Jumping into the politics game right now, that's pretty important here. And if you just look at New York State and you look at the special election that we just had here for that House seat, it was important. The messaging was important. So I think that maybe the Biden administration, the Biden campaign is moving to a place where they can actually kind of rebalance the scales a little bit with Trump's scare tactics.
No, listen, Joe Biden has issued more executive orders on immigration than Donald Trump has because there is an intention around fixing it. And what I think Republicans have done is can't use reproductive rights, can't take a victory lap on that, so let's now bring in immigration. And it was used very heavily in New York 3. I don't think it worked there. I mean, Tom Suozzi ended up winning, but they will continue to come back to it. As a child of immigrants, this angers me to no end. I was born, but I've been told countless times about how my family was supported and helped by Catholic charities back in the day. To me, if there is intentionality around wanting to support immigrants, we would do it. The nonprofits would come together in conjunction with government to make it actually happen. But now I've got to see migrant families living in furniture stores in New York. That is heartbreaking, right? And so, yes, I think ultimately something should be done. I do think in many ways Democrats and Republicans have failed immigrants in this country. But if I were to actually game this out, I would say that ultimately Joe Biden will be able to bring the narrative back for Democrats. It's going to be difficult and will take some actual intention on the part of my party to do so. But right now, this is a frustrating issue that, is not going to go away anytime soon.
Here's the problem with the narrative. Not enough people see the truth. We talk about it here all the time. The truth matters, but only if you hear it. And I want to share just a bit of what we heard this week. Watch this.
Migrant crime is beginning to spiral out of control.
There's a migrant crime spree killing Americans.
Migrant crime wave. The migrant crime crisis. The migrant crime. The growing immigrant crime crisis.
Every third day, there's a story about some sort of migrant crime.
Okay, let's fact check. Crime and migrant crime is not rising. It is down. It's down in the big cities that receive the most migrants. Crime is down. And if that was not enough, while Donald Trump was at the border, remember, you had Mike Johnson saying Joe Biden was there for a photo op when it was Trump who sat down for a primetime interview. And I want to share this little kicker he threw in. Watch this.
I also think that they are the radicals because they will kill the baby in 8 months, 9 months. Under Roe v. Wade, they had the right to kill the baby after birth. I mean, literally after birth in some cases.
He's been saying that line for years, and no one ever challenges on him on it. But we have to remember, of all the people running for president, Donald Trump is the only one who has hired undocumented immigrants to avoid paying a living wage to American workers in 2 different centuries. Polish illegal immigrants built Trump Tower.
Because I'm a smart businessman.
He's a smart businessman. But let's go to the fact that if you believe this Bible, the only law on immigration or borders in the Old or New Testament is the commandment to welcome the stranger. Greg Abbott heard that and thought, oh, razor wire in the Rio Grande. At the end of the day, the biggest scandal of all of this, the greatest hypocrisy of all of this is, I've never heard Fox News call a white lawbreaker an illegal in my life. But there is no wall they can build that's high enough to hide the gigantic help wanted sign at our southern border. If the Republican Party wanted border crossings to end, it could happen in a month. You start locking up those white employers who dangle those jobs. They'll stop crossing the border. Supply and demand. They could do it if they wanted. They don't. Greg Abbott will raid the meat processing plants and arrest all the illegals, not the guys counting money in the back. They know that if you actually ended undocumented immigration, a salad would cost $400. Donald Trump doesn't eat a lot of salad, so maybe he doesn't think about it too much. But
meat would too, and the meat packers would get hurt.
Anyone talking about illegals but doesn't want to talk about the people doing the hiring is lying to you.
No, I agree, absolutely right. And look, back in the 80s, even Ronald Reagan was talking about amnesty.
He gave
and I'm not siding with Reagan or Republicans on this issue, but my point is the same one I had before. If there is an interest in incorporating individuals into this country, and at that time, a lot of Central and South Americans, right? Because there was this design to say, yes, we will provide some kind of amnesty. We will create these sanctuary cities. We'll get the Christian evangelical community. We'll get government to be supportive. And the goal there is, hey, by the way, here's the Republican Party who's done this for you. Come on over. And I'm not saying that it should be Democrat or Republican, but what I am saying is that when a party is interested in actually bringing folks into this country, Democrats did it too way back with West Indians in the early 1900s. So it is done. It is doable. But the point is that at this juncture, when you conflate ethnic nationalism and economic nationalism, layer Christian nationalism on top of that, there is this, well, after a certain shade, we don't want you. And that's where we are.
Reagan said open borders. He said, go back home and work when you're done here.
Danny, mass deportation, militarizing the border, the draconian things that Trump talks of, are they even legal?
That's a really good question. We saw early on Donald Trump tried several executive orders by fiat, which were overturned relatively quickly. So Donald Trump's view of what he can do in terms of immigration is often not consistent with the law. For example, we have asylum laws that can't just be ignored or overturned by executive order. Those laws, those federal laws, require us to accept, under certain conditions, people applying for asylum. There are certain things that Donald Trump simply cannot do by executive order or by a wave of his hand. And we've known that since at least 2016, 2017, when he tried at the very beginning of his first presidency, maybe only presidency. But, I mean, he's tried it before, and he's wrong. But at this point, does anyone think he's right about the law? I mean, we just saw a clip of him saying they're trying to abort babies after they're born. I mean, that isn't even metaphysically possible.
It's insane. Donald Trump loves to say that the Republican Party is unified. But just look at these primaries. I mean, pick a week. Nikki Haley's getting 20, 40% of primary voters. In Congress, Republicans can't even get their faction of Congress in order. So do people see this, right? We're headed into Super Tuesday. What do you want to see? Because what Donald Trump is telling people at the podium is not what's bearing out in reality.